Under the seas off northern Europe, a lost graveyard of mega warships.
They were the H-bombs of the era.
This is a fight to the death.
Off the coast of Uruguay, near the port of Montevideo, lies one of the most mysterious and dangerous Nazi warships from World War II, the Admiral Graf Spee.
This is the wreck of the Graf Spee, lying on the seafloor just 65 feet under the South Atlantic.
Rusted from the passage of time and covered completely in silt and barnacles, no one could have expected that this long-forgotten vessel hid such dark secrets. What started as a simple expedition to uncover artifacts turned into one of the strangest discoveries made out in the seas. One thing is certain. What divers found inside the sealed compartments of the Graf Spee will leave you completely stunned. But before I reveal the shocking truth about the Graf Spee, we must first talk about why this specific ship was so important that the Allied forces hunted it across the seas as if their lives depended on it.
There's this Nazi secret. No one can be sure about what's down there.
We knew immediately that we had found it.
Where the sea war involved action against one of the deadliest battleships in Hitler's navy. She was the Graf Spee.
Birth of a legend. Admiral Graf Spee was a terror on the sea. It prowled like a shadow, huge, fast, and packing some serious firepower. By the time the enemy saw it, it was too late. Fire and explosions awaited anything that came across this warship's path. And the secret behind it all was deception. Deception and lies. The Graf Spee was supposedly a pocket battleship, but from its very conception, the warship was meant to break rules. The keel of the warship was laid on October 1st, 1932, and under the Treaty of Versailles, enforced after World War I, ships like these couldn't be over 10,000 long tons. The Graf Spee was supposed to follow those requirements, and on paper it did. The reality was far different. The Graf Spee had a full load displacement of 16,020 long tons when it was launched in 1934, going completely against the treaty. 2 years later, the ship was commissioned into the German service. The Graf Spee was a force to be reckoned with. The 610-feet warship boasted 6 11-inch guns as its primary armament and 8 5.9-inch guns as a secondary battery. Additionally, it also featured strong anti-aircraft capabilities. The Graf Spee was more than a fortress. It had more firepower than any other ship in its weight class. And that didn't mean it was slow. Powering the whole thing were 4 9-cylinder double-acting 2-stroke diesel engines, giving it a top speed of 28.5 knots. The formula the Germans had come up with was incredibly simple. Any ship that could have outgunned the Graf Spee could never catch up to it. And any ship that could catch up to it couldn't have outgunned it. With that simple idea, Germany had designed and created the apex predator of the sea. Nothing stood a chance against the terror of the seas.
To hell with that! Keep transmitting! Make sure every ship in the region knows they're here!
Aye, aye, sir.
The apex predator. Graf Spee's career before World War II was quite uneventful. It was during the war that it really got to shine. Under the command of Hans Langsdorff, the Graf Spee was sent out to sea with only one goal in mind.
Aye, affirmative. Men to action stations. Load SAPs.
Yes, sir.
To hunt down and destroy Allied supply ships. The aim was to cripple the supply route that were fueling the war. And when Graf Spee set out to hunt, it did not disappoint. SS Clement was the first to go, its captain imprisoned and the ship sunk. Next came Newton Beach, and after that, 7 more followed. Graf Spee had become a symbol of destruction for any ship that sighted it. It had sunk 9 merchant ships without causing a single casualty. That's because the Graf Spee had strict orders to follow the prize rules in combat. These rules ensured that the crew of the ship being attacked was evacuated before it was sunk.
This was the largest scale maritime war in history.
The hunt. While this success must have been joyous to the Germans, it was equally as distressing for the Allied forces. The British realized the extent of the danger they were facing if they let Graf Spee roam freely. It was too dangerous, too advanced a ship to be left alone. And so a hunt began. The British and French Navy pooled their resources, forming 8 groups of warships. All 8 groups had the same purpose: to find and hunt down the Graf Spee. How one boat inspired such terror is impressive. One of these groups, consisting of 3 cruisers, Exeter, Ajax, and Achilles, caught up with Graf Spee near Uruguay in a confrontation known as the Battle of the River Plate. What followed was a tremendous fight, the massive guns on the ships tearing holes into each other, killing men in a matter of seconds. When the dust settled, there was no clear winner. The Graf Spee was battered and damaged, but the Allied ships were even worse off. Graf Spee damaged Exeter so severely that it had to flee. Ajax took a few hits as well, and in the meantime, Graf Spee had gotten away. Undefeated, the captains retreated with their ships. Respite. Hans Langsdorff managed to sail his battered ship into port and was granted permission to stay for 4 days to conduct repairs. When he assessed the damage, things were not looking good. Graf Spee had been hit 70 times during the confrontation. 36 of the crew were dead and 60 were wounded. Langsdorff himself had been hit twice by shrapnel. Worst of all, 2 key components of the ship were now badly damaged.
We was firing 10 shells at a time. 10 14-inch shells were going all over it.
The oil purification plant and the desalination plant. Without those, sailing to Germany was going to be impossible. On top of that, Langsdorff was hearing disturbing rumors. According to the newspapers, there was an even larger Navy force gathering to confront the Graf Spee as soon as it left harbor. Langsdorff was in a tough position. He only had 2 options left: stay at port or attempt to break out of the blockade. Staying at the port wasn't possible since sooner or later the enemy would be granted access to the ship by the Uruguayan government. And breaking out would mean losing even more lives. Langsdorff went for a 3rd option: to scuttle the ship. He took a portion of the crew with him, took the Graf Spee out away from the port, and set up scuttling charges. Soon after, the ship exploded into flames, and the legend that had once roamed the seas as the apex predator was laid to rest. The fire burned for 2 days non-stop, and the column of smoke could be seen from the port for even longer. But Langsdorff had no idea he had made a terrible mistake. Turned out, the Graf Spee was not as trapped in the port as Langsdorff had thought. The whole thing about British forces gathering to ambush was just lies. Propaganda pandered by the British authorities to spook Langsdorff. In reality, only 1 ship had come to back up the Ajax and the Achilles. The Graf Spee had a reasonable chance of breaking out. But the captain never knew that. However, the saga did not end there. There was one more act yet to play out. A very tragic and sad act. Hans Langsdorff, ever the dutiful captain, probably realized his mistake and decided to make amends. He got in his full dress uniform in his room in the Buenos Aires hotel and shot himself while lying on the ship's battle insignia. Earlier, he had already written a letter explaining what had prompted him to make the decision to scuttle the ship and why he thought it was the right thing to do. Sometimes, ships outlast the legacy of their captains. The story of Graf Spee was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. The wreck. The wreck of the Graf Spee happened to be in a rather shallow part of the ocean. For decades, the top part of the ship jutted out of the ocean during low tide. As time passed, the ship started to fall victim to the elements. It began to rust, and the sea life took over. But the wreck did not fall into obscurity. It could be seen from the port, so naturally, many wanted to go out and see the wreck up close. And they did, in rented boats and rarely with scuba gear. Over time, a layer of silt settled over the ship. The winds and storms broke it apart, until eventually, decades after its scuttling, the whole thing was finally covered in water, even during low tide. The pieces that had jutted out were now broken off, scattered nearby on the ocean floor. The main body was sinking deeper and deeper into the ocean bed, listing heavily. At last, the feared Graf Spee came to its last resting position, down on its side, half buried and half covered in coral. By all means, this should have been a fitting end to the legend. The Curiosity. But instead of fading into the annals of history like many others, this Nazi warship began garnering even more attention. There was always a question that hung in the air for those who were interested in the history of World War II. And the question was simple. What secrets did the Graf Spee hide within its bowels? In answer were only more questions. What were the things the crew had left in there before scuttling it? Why had the captain chosen to scuttle the ship rather than abandon it? Graf Spee was, after all, one of the most important ships in the German Navy, and ever since it was sunk, no one had accessed those sealed vaults and chambers within it. The curiosity just won't go away. But little did they know that their curiosity would lead to discoveries that would blow their minds. A British inspection. The first ones to try to explore the Graf Spee were none other than the British. The Navy officials went in quietly, their main interest, the technology on board. They wanted to see how advanced the radar and fire control systems of the ship were, which had given the German Navy such an advantage during the war. The hope was to find some new tech that had survived the scuttling to maybe advance the technology Britain had. Britain was no stranger to reverse engineering German tech, and this was a golden opportunity. Unfortunately for them, the crew had been quite thorough in destroying everything important. After all, they were no amateurs. They knew that if any of this information fell into the enemy's hands, it would spell disaster. So when scuttling, they had destroyed anything and everything. And to top it off, they had spread all the ammunition around the ship before setting off the scuttling charges, just to really make sure everything was destroyed. The findings from the British expedition were never really made public. It was one of those hush-hush operations done in as much secrecy as possible. And since wartime records are still sealed in most cases, we will not know those findings anytime soon. A dangerous expedition. After the British had left, the Graf Spee nearly fell into obscurity. But legends don't die so easily. In the early 2000s, there were talks of an exploration mission. With the backing of private funders, local divers were being recruited to do an expedition to the wreck. The aim was to retrieve some of the artifacts buried within the ship. This mission was going to be tough. While the wreck was indeed in shallow waters, that didn't mean diving into it was going to be safe. The cloud of silt and dirt reduced visibility, while the strong ocean current made every movement more taxing on the body. But these divers knew these waters like the back of their hand. They were locals. They knew what they were getting into and were ready for it. The expedition took place in 2004, and it was every bit as challenging as expected. But the efforts were about to be worth it because what the divers found was enough to blow the minds of the experts around the globe. The first find of the expedition was the gunnery range, finding telemeter of the Graf Spee. It was a critical piece of equipment that allowed the crew to track the target and fire with precision. It must have played a key role in its last fight against the British ships. The massive piece was retrieved and brought back to the surface as a marvel of World War II engineering. But the more significant find turned out to be a Nazi memorabilia. The divers uncovered a 6'7" statue of an eagle bearing the Nazi swastika. The statue was made out of bronze and weighed nearly 900 pounds. No one was expecting to find this statue in the wreck. Turned out it had once been placed at the stern of Graf Spee, a sign of the Nazi ideals and pride, but this was far from being the strangest thing found aboard Graf Spee's wreck. The fate of the statue. The eagle statue became the center of controversy as soon as it was found. It made international news, and no one seemed to be able to figure out what to do with it. First, it was placed as an exhibit, but the public complained, saying it was glorifying Nazis. It was quickly taken off the display and placed in a warehouse. Since then, the statue has remained out of public sight. The Uruguayan government at last came to the conclusion of melting down the statue and having an artist turn it into a dove statue, a symbol of peace. After the backlash, they retracted that decision in no time, too. Punta del Este, a Jewish businessman, even offered to buy the eagle just so he could blow it up. But as expected, the government refused to entertain that offer. The Nazi statue became a point of contention. If it were destroyed, it would be destroying a piece of history, no matter how hateful. And if it was kept and exhibited in a museum, there was the accusation of holding on to Nazi symbols. Even today, no one knows what to do with the statue. What hides in the wreck? Despite these staggering discoveries, the divers knew there was more yet to be explored. They had only been able to access a small portion of the wreck. A lot more of it remained untouched, sealed away from the world. And these inaccessible compartments happened to be the most important ones on the ship. They included the captain's cabins, the command center, and the communication room. The most important things on the entire ship would have been stored in one of these rooms. Who knew what was inside these hidden compartments? Maybe even information on secret missions. The theories were everywhere in the diving community. With that one expedition, the divers had opened a Pandora's box of questions. And until they got the answers, the world was not going to rest. Unfortunately, the diving team didn't have the technology or the funding just yet to reach the sealed chambers. This ship was too damaged, too old, and the conditions were too dangerous. Getting to the sealed vaults would mean death, so any attempt at uncovering the secrets was halted. A new expedition. It wasn't until 2025 that another expedition was launched. An international effort with experts from around the world coming together to plan an exploration mission of the Graf Spee's wreck. But accessing the wreck was just as dangerous as it was during the 2004 expedition. It was the same strong currents and low visibility, making every wrong move deadly. But there was one big difference: the difference in technology. With the backing of organizations in the United Kingdom, Germany, the US, and Uruguay, the divers were able to bring in fully autonomous submersibles to get the job done. That way, no diver's life was going to be in danger. These submersibles were fitted with state-of-the-art tech such as sediment-penetrating radar, ultra-high-frequency sonars, and 3D photogrammetry rigs. The wreck that had been badly damaged could now be explored safely. These submersibles, really small in size, could access the inner chambers which humans couldn't get to due to the tight squeezes and the inherent danger of diving in an unstable wreck. And what they found had the whole world shocked. Initially, the divers found nothing of great interest, but that was because they hadn't made it yet to their ultimate goal: accessing the section just behind the ship's conning tower. This part of the ship had never been explored since the Scuttling, meaning if the divers were going to find anything of value, this was the spot. Kronos Descent. And to get to this spot, the divers deployed the Kronos, a submersible custom-made for dangerous missions like this one. With everything in order, the descent began. The submersible took to the sea, approaching the wreck swiftly. Navigating through the wreck, the submersible soon came across the sealed compartment. But the door was closed shut, as it had been for decades. However, the Kronos was equipped to handle this. It employed one of its mechanical arms to open the hatch. It took some effort, but the operators managed to open it. And inside, they saw something unexpected. The compartment was remarkably well preserved. The reason why was right there in front of them: silt. The fine material had covered everything inside the compartment, preserving it by shielding it from the elements. It was everything the marine archaeologist could have hoped for. But what was even more startling were the contents of the chamber. There was the usual stuff you would expect to find on a warship, like shelves, cabinets, and tables. But the attention of the operators was immediately drawn to one thing inside the room. It was a metal case, covered in silt, but still holding its shape. Could it be completely sealed even now? What did it contain? What valuable artifacts or documents could the captain and officers on the Graf Spee have kept within it? Those were all the questions that ran through the minds of the operators. And to get to the answer, they had to retrieve the locked box. Then came another surprise. The visibility was not great, but what the operators managed to see was an outline of the Nazi eagle insignia right there on the metal case. This case was definitely of German origins, and probably contained something very, very important. Mercible was not up to such complex tasks, so it was sailed back. Divers then started planning a second dive, this time with the proper equipment needed to conduct a retrieval mission. Meanwhile, everyone was wondering about the metal case inside the ship. The divers counted a total of 3 weather-sealed storage trucks, and the vault they were found in was accessible only to the top officers during the ship's life. Not only that, but they were placed in such a way that they weren't easy to spot. Were they being hidden? If so, why? No one knew the answer, but soon they would find out. Retrieval. The sealed containers were brought to the surface through the combined effort of the whole diving team. It was no easy task, but it was done expertly and with practiced efficiency. Thankfully, no lives were lost in the process. With the trunks now in front of them, it was time to open them up. Mystery lingered all around the sealed trunks, and with just one hand movement opening the lid, it would all come to fruition. All those hours of diving into the dangerous waters were going to be paid off, and when the trunks were finally opened, it shocked everyone watching. None of the historians could believe their eyes at what they were seeing. As each one of the trunks was opened in a clean room, more and more pieces of World War II history began unfolding. Revelations. First, they took out paper documents kept within the trunks. The paper had been expertly preserved using oilcloth and sealed in a waxed enclosure, and on these papers were records and coded transmissions used by the Graf Spee's crew. Each piece revealed more and more about how the ship operated and how, in the pre-digital world, warfare was being conducted. But when these documents were read closely, they revealed even more shocking secrets. Some of the documents were marked with high-level codes, meaning they were for the eyes of the top brass. Several even had the insignia of Siegkriegsleitung stamped on them. These documents were going to be extremely valuable, not only for historians who could use them to piece together more of World War II's timeline, but also for collectors who would pay big bucks for these items. These documents included logs and guidelines for the ship to follow, outlining strategies during combat and navigation issued by the Nazi High Command. One tactic mentioned showed how the Graf Spee used to tail neutral-flagged cargo vessels in order to hide its radar signature. The documents also revealed that the Graf Spee had access to more information on enemy movements and better communication with Berlin than previously thought. Experts long believed the Graf Spee was most of the time issuing its own commands, but the documents showed that the ship was in touch with Berlin way more often. These documents challenged what we knew of the war. The history was changing in front of the experts' eyes. Many theories were confirmed, and many more were debunked based on these records. It was a treasure trove of information, but then again, that was by far the least interesting find the trunks contained. There were also some notebooks and papers containing the scribbles and thoughts of the officers aboard the Graf Spee. It was their personal opinions right there on paper, often showing discontent with the orders from the high command on the ship's movements and tactics. These notes showed that, after all, the sailors manning these seas were human beings. And they too had their doubts about the war and how it was being managed. It gave the wreck a human aspect, showing how, despite being a Nazi warship, the Graf Spee was once the home of many souls. Several of them died on board during the only battle the ship ever fought, the Enigma of the Seas. And now to the most interesting find of the bunch. 2 encryption machines similar to the Enigma machines used by the Germans. Only these ones were especially modified for the needs of the Graf Spee and naval communication, and that alone made them extremely unique. These machines were used by the Graf Spee to communicate with underwater submarines. The discovery of these machines sheds more light on how the warships and submarines communicated and planned out their attacks during World War II. With 2 of these custom machines at hand, cryptographers had just caught a new glimpse into the ingenuity used during World War II to run the naval war of Germany. And to top it all off, the divers also found a configuration sheet for the machines extremely well preserved, same as the other documents. Another landmark discovery in understanding World War II cryptography. With this configuration sheet, they could reconstruct the cipher cycles used back then. ghost ships. But the surprises were not over yet. Many of the documents found in the trunks revealed something even more shocking. The officers had been talking about German vessels operating across the ocean alongside Graf Spee during the war. However, there were no such vessels recorded in the war records. That raised an important question. Did Germany have more vessels sailing the seas and hunting the Allied ships during the war than we are told? If so, shouldn't there be other records of those vessels being sighted or being tracked? To be honest, there should be, but the governments involved aren't very keen on making those records public. These logs from the Graf Spee are our only source for information on these mystery vessels for now, at least until more records are unsealed to confirm or deny the existence of these ships. All of this has been from just one chamber opened in the Graf Spee, just one single chamber. Who knows what more lies hidden in the other unopened vaults? And judging by the significance of the finds, the other chambers could hold information and artifacts equally as valuable and historical in nature. This wreck could be hiding things that will change what we know of history. The Graf Spee is not done giving, and no doubt it won't stop providing more groundbreaking discoveries anytime in the near future, with so much yet to explore. With that, we are done for today. Why did the documents from Graf Spee conflict so much with what we know of World War II? Is the government trying to hide something? Let me know your theories in the comments down below. I would love to read them all. And while you are at it, be sure to like the video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, goodbye and stay curious.